Greetings everyone. We're gathered here to figure out WTF was, is, or will be. Charles de Gaulle. Let's dive in. The Charles de Gaulle serves as the flagship of the French Navy. Commissioned in 2001, this ship holds a significant place in naval history as France's first nuclear-powered surface vessel and the only nuclear carrier built outside the United States. Named after the renowned French president and general, Charles de Gaulle, this carrier represents a milestone in modern naval engineering. Equipped with Dassault Rafale M fighter jets, E-2C Hawkeye aircraft, and helicopters such as the AS-365F Dolphin Pedro, EC-725 Caracol, and AS-532 Cougar, the ship is designed for combat search and rescue missions. Its defense systems include advanced electronics and Aster missiles. The Charles de Gaulle is a CATOBAR, catapult-assisted takeoff but arrested recovery carrier, utilizing two 246-foot steam catapults. These are shorter versions of the catapults found on U.S. Nimitz-class carriers, located at the bow and waist of the ship. As of July 2021, the Charles de Gaulle remained the only non-American carrier capable of launching aircraft with a catapult system, enabling the operation of U.S. Navy F-A-18E F Super Hornets and C-2 Greyhound planes. Construction. The Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier officially took over from the older Foch in 2001. While Foch and its sister ship Clemenceau were built in the early 1960s, the need for a new, modern replacement became clear by the mid-1970s. The hull of the Charles de Gaulle was laid down in April 1989 at the DCNS Brest shipyard. By May 1994, it was launched, weighing in at 42,000 tons when fully loaded, making it the largest warship launched in Western Europe since HMS Ark Royal in 1950. Originally, it was set to be named Richelieu after the historical figure, Cardinal Richelieu, as decided by President François Mitterrand in 1986. However, in May 1987, Prime Minister Jacques Chirac changed the name to Charles de Gaulle. Delays soon plagued the project. A lack of consistent funding, made worse by the economic downturn of the early 1990s, caused multiple pauses in construction. The ship's budget ballooned, eventually exceeding €3 billion, and work came to a halt several times in the early 1990s. By the time the Charles de Gaulle was finally commissioned in May 2001, it was 5 years behind schedule. A curious incident arose in 1993 when The Guardian reported that British intelligence agents had allegedly inspected the ship, possibly to learn more about the carrier's nuclear reactor shielding. However, both the British government and French intelligence services denied any such occurrence. Trials and technical problems. In 1999, Charles de Gaulle began its sea trials, and during this phase, it became clear that the flight deck needed to be extended to safely handle the E-2C Hawkeye. This sparked some negative reactions, as similar modifications had already been necessary on older carriers like Foch and Clemenceau when new fighter aircraft were introduced. The cost of the extension was relatively small, amounting to about 5 million francs, or just 0.025% of the total budget for the project. On October 24, 2000, the carrier left Toulon for its final sea trial. However, disaster struck during the night of November 9 to 10, when the ship's portside propeller broke while sailing in the western Atlantic, headed toward Norfolk, Virginia. The ship had to return to Toulon to replace the damaged part. Though the supplier, Atlantic Industry, wasn't thought to be at fault intentionally, they were blamed for the poor quality construction. Make matters worse, a fire later destroyed the supplier's records during an investigation. As a quick fix, the Clemenceau's older, less advanced propellers were used temporarily, limiting Charles de Gaulle's speed to 25 knots instead of the intended 27 knots. In early March 2001, the ship went back to sea with these replacement propellers and achieved a speed of just over 25 knots in trials. Another issue arose in September 2001, when it was reported that the carrier had higher than acceptable radiation levels on board. This caused a stir in the media, although it was later clarified that the levels were within design parameters. Only the safety regulations had changed. Around this time, as the U.S. was preparing its military response to the September 11 attacks, French media pointed out the nation's lack of deployable military power. Criticism grew toward Charles de Gaulle, who was undergoing repairs again. Former President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing even called it a half-aircraft carrier and pushed for a second carrier, known as PA-2, to ensure constant availability for the French fleet. Maintenance and upgrades. Charles de Gaulle underwent its first major overhaul starting in September 2007. This 15-month-long refit primarily focused on refueling its nuclear power plant, a necessary procedure after 6 years of service. During that time, the ship had circled the globe 12 times in distance, spent 900 days at sea, and launched aircraft 19,000 times. Several upgrades were made as part of the overhaul, including the installation of new propellers, finally allowing the carrier to reach its full design speed of 27 knots. These replaced the temporary propellers that had been in use since 2001. In addition to propeller upgrades, maintenance on the aircraft systems and weapons storage facilities was carried out, allowing the ship to accommodate newer Rafale F-3 fighters. These advanced jets were capable of carrying ASMP-A nuclear missiles and Scalp-EG cruise missiles. The ship's satellite communication capabilities were also improved, with bandwidth increased by 10 times. The refit, which was completed by December 2008, also slightly increased the ship's displacement to 42,500 tons. However, just a few months later, in March 2009, technical issues forced the carrier to return to Toulon for repairs. After this, a period of intense work was scheduled to restore full operational capability for Charles de Gaulle and its air group. Not everything went smoothly. On October 14, 2010, a planned 4-month deployment was cut short after just 1 day when an electrical fault in the propulsion system caused the ship to return to port. The aircraft carrier received an extensive midlife refit beginning in February 2017, which lasted 18 months. By September 2018, Charles de Gaulle was back in service with a refueled reactor, routine maintenance complete, and an updated combat system designed to improve communication with allies and enhance support for the Rafale fighters stationed on board. In October 2001, Charles de Gaulle took part in a successful trial of the Link 16 high-bandwidth secure data network. On October 11th, the carrier, along with the frigate Cassard and 4 AWACS aircraft, tested this advanced system, which allows real-time monitoring of airspace all the way from southern England to the Mediterranean. This advanced network provided immediate data sharing capabilities, which were also relayed to the frigate Jean Bart, using the older MIAL STD 6-11 system. The success of this trial demonstrated Charles de Gaulle's role in enhancing coordination and communication within naval operations. Afghanistan. On November 21, 2001, France made the decision to deploy Charles de Gaulle to the Indian Ocean in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, targeting Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Task Force 473, commanded by Rear Admiral François Cluzel and consisting of 2,900 personnel, set sail on December 1, 2001. The force included Charles de Gaulle, alongside the frigates Le Mot-Piquet, Jean de Vienne, Jean Bart, the nuclear submarine Rubies, the tanker Meuse, and the Commandant de Queuing. The air group aboard Charles de Gaulle consisted of 16 Super Étendard jets, 1 E-2C Hawkeye, 2 Rafale M fighters, and several helicopters. On December 19th, the Super Étendards flew their first missions over Afghanistan, conducting reconnaissance and bombing runs across 1,900 miles of territory. The carrier launched around 770 sorties during the operation. On February 18, 2002, a Helios satellite detected unusual activity near Gardes. The next day, after U.S. Special Forces confirmed the reports, Charles de Gaulle deployed 2 Super Étendard reconnaissance planes. By February 20th, British and American forces entered the area, leading to the start of Operation Anaconda in March 2002. Throughout March, Charles de Gaulle's Super Étendards, supported by 6 land-based Mirage 2000 jets, carried out airstrikes on al-Qaeda targets. Some U.S. suggested targets were rejected by French forces out of concern for civilian casualties. Despite this, on March 11, 2002, President George W. Bush praised France's contribution, highlighting that the nation had committed nearly a quarter of its navy to support the operation. During this time, the French Air Group expanded to include 16 Super Étendards, 6 Mirage 2000s, 5 Rafales, and 2 Hawkeye AWACS. In February 2002, the air wings of Charles de Gaulle and the USS John C. Stennis began landing on each other's decks, further strengthening the cooperation between the French and American forces. By May 2, 2002, Charles de Gaulle had reached Singapore for a brief break before returning to Oman on May 18. During June 2002, while Charles de Gaulle was stationed in the Arabian Sea, armed Rafale fighters conducted joint combat air patrols alongside the United States Navy off the coast of India and Pakistan. This marked an important milestone in the operational history of the Rafale M fighter, highlighting its integration with Charles de Gaulle and its capabilities in real-world military scenarios. The Charles de Gaulle continued its involvement in Operation Enduring Freedom in 2005, providing further support to coalition forces in Afghanistan. In May 2006, the carrier returned to Southwest Asia, once again playing a critical role in supporting military operations in the region. The Charles de Gaulle also regularly takes part in the annual Varuna naval exercises, a series of bilateral operations conducted between the French and Indian navies. These exercises are essential for building cooperation and strengthening military ties between the two nations. Fifth, overseas deployment, Task Force 473 and Operation Agapanthus 2010. On October 30, 2010, Charles de Gaulle led Task Force 473 on a 4-month deployment as part of Operation Agapanthus 2010. The mission took the French Naval Task Group through the Mediterranean Sea, Red Sea, Indian Ocean, and Persian Gulf. Alongside Charles de Gaulle, the task group included the frigates Forbin and Tourville, the nuclear attack submarine Amethyst, the replenishment ship Meuse, and 3,000 sailors. The Embarked Aviation Group, EAG, featured 12 Super Étendard attack jets, 10 Rafale fighters, and 2 E-2C Hawkeye 2000 AEW aircraft. Rear Admiral Jean-Louis Carrinard led the task force, which had several critical objectives during the deployment. On November 28, 2010, tragedy struck when a French Rafale fighter jet crashed near Charles de Gaulle, which was operating about 60 miles off Pakistan's coast in support of coalition forces in Afghanistan. Fortunately, the pilot safely ejected and was quickly rescued by helicopter. The cause of the crash was still under investigation at the time. During the deployment in December 2010, the British Type 22 frigate Cumberland and the American destroyer USS Halsey joined the task force to escort Charles de Gaulle. This cooperation highlighted the growing interoperability between France and its allies, particularly in light of the recently signed Anglo-French Defense Treaty. In early 2011, between January 7–14, Task Force 473 took part in Varuna 10, a bilateral naval exercise with the Indian Navy. The Indian side included the aircraft carrier Virat, frigates Godavari and Ganga, and the submarine Shalki. The exercises were divided into 2 phases, a harbor phase from January 7 to 11th, and a sea phase from January 11 to 14 in the Arabian Sea. Afterward, the task force visited the port of Goa. On January 30, 2011, Charles de Gaulle and the frigate Forbin made a goodwill visit to Corfacon in the UAE. Operation Agapanthus 2010 concluded on February 21, 2011, with Task Force 473 completing over 1,000 flying hours in support of NATO's ISAF operations in Afghanistan. The task force also participated in bilateral exercises with military forces from India, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, enhancing the interoperability of the French Navy and strengthening ties with regional partners. 2011 Mediterranean Operations. In March 2011, Charles de Gaulle was sent to the Mediterranean Sea to help enforce United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973, which established a no-fly zone over Libya. This mission was part of Operation Harmattan, aimed at supporting international efforts during the Libyan conflict. The carrier was accompanied by the frigates Dupleix and Aconit, along with the replenishment tanker Meuse. As part of Operation Unified Protector, Charles de Gaulle's air fleet played a crucial role, completing 1,350 sorties during the intervention in Libya. By August 10, 2011, after months of intensive operations, the carrier was withdrawn for scheduled maintenance at Toulon. Later in the year, in December 2011, Charles de Gaulle returned to sea for further maintenance and upkeep during an underway period to ensure the ship's readiness for future missions. 2012 Finale Exercises. On February 2, 2012, Charles de Gaulle set out for 3 days of sea trials. Just a few days later, on February 5th, pilot qualifications began for its air group. This marked an important transition. Its pilots previously flying the Super Étendard Modernisé (SEM) strike fighters began training on the newer Rafale M fighters. By March 16, 2012, Charles de Gaulle embarked on a month-long deployment to the Mediterranean Sea. Task Force, under the command of Rear Admiral Philippe Coindreau, included the frigates Chevalier Paul, Dupleix, Montcalm, and Enseigne de Vaisseau Jacobert, along with the replenishment tanker Meuse and the nuclear submarine Emeraude. Carrier's air group was equipped with 7 Rafale fighters, 7 Super Étendard Modernisé (SEM) strike fighters, and 2 E-2C Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft. The highlight of this deployment was the 2012 Finale exercises. Began on April 5th. These exercises included the participation of land-based Atlantique II maritime patrol aircraft and concluded on April 12th. Notably, this was the first major operation involving the French Navy's new Cayman helicopter, further enhancing the carrier group's capability. Operations against Islamic State. In January 2015, Charles de Gaulle began preparations for exercises in the Indian Ocean. By late February, the carrier and its battle group entered the Persian Gulf to take part in Operation Shamal, France's contribution to the fight against Islamic State militants in Iraq. France, the first country to join the U.S.-led coalition, already had 15 fighters, patrol aircraft, and refueling planes stationed in nearby countries. With the addition of Charles de Gaulle, France significantly boosted its presence, bringing an additional 30 aircraft into the fight. Carrier Group arrived in the Persian Gulf on February 15, 2015, and began launching airstrikes just a week later, on February 22. This came 7 weeks after the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris, which had galvanized France's resolve to combat jihadist terrorism. Positioned off the northern coast of Bahrain, Charles de Gaulle's 12 Rafale and 9 Super Étendard fighters could hit targets much faster than French aircraft operating from the United Arab Emirates. After completing numerous strike and reconnaissance missions, Charles de Gaulle left the Persian Gulf in late April 2015 to participate in joint exercises with the Indian military. During this 2-month deployment, Carrier launched between 10 and 15 sorties each day. Later that year, on November 5, 2015, France announced that Charles de Gaulle would return to the region for further operations. Parting from Toulon on November 18th, Carrier was initially planned for the Persian Gulf, but was rerouted to the eastern Mediterranean, positioning it closer to targets in Syria. By November 23rd, just 10 days after the Paris terrorist attacks, Charles de Gaulle was operational, with a larger-than-usual air wing consisting of 18 Rafales and 8 Super Étendards. With approximately 31 to 34 aircraft on board, the carrier played a crucial role in striking Islamic State targets in Syria. On December 7, 2015, Rear Admiral René-Jean Crignola, aboard Charles de Gaulle, took command of the U.S. Navy's Task Force 50, making him the first non-American to lead coalition naval strike operations. For their efforts, the crew of Charles de Gaulle was awarded a meritorious unit commendation by the U.S. Navy in June 2016. In late September 2016, Carrier returned to the Syrian coast to support the Battle of Mosul. A squadron of 24 Rafale M aircraft provided crucial airstrikes and reconnaissance, helping the international coalition against ISIL. In 2020, Charles de Gaulle continued its operations in the eastern Mediterranean as part of Operation Shamal. This time, the carrier was joined by the U.S. Navy destroyer Ross and other Allied ships, including vessels from Germany, Belgium, Denmark, Greece, Spain, the Netherlands, and Portugal, showcasing strong multinational cooperation. During the operation, Charles de Gaulle and its 2,000-member crew, along with a Durance-class tanker and a Hellenic Navy frigate, docked at the port of Limassol for a 5-day visit. Crew was addressed by the President of Cyprus, Nikos Anastasiades, and Ambassador Isabel Dumont. alongside Captain Guillaume Pinget. In March 2019, Charles de Gaulle led Task Force 473 on a 5-month operation known as Mission Clemenceau, traveling through the Mediterranean Sea. During this deployment, aircraft from the carrier took part in the final major battle against the Islamic State, Baghouz Falkani, marking a crucial moment in the fight against the extremist group. After completing operations in the Mediterranean, Charles de Gaulle continued its mission, sailing into the Indian Ocean. On May 28, 2019, the carrier arrived in Singapore, where it took part in a bilateral exercise with the Singapore Armed Forces, further strengthening military cooperation between France and Singapore. COVID-19 pandemic. In April 2020, Charles de Gaulle was forced to return to its home port of Toulon earlier than expected after 40 crew members began showing symptoms of COVID-19. This was reported by the Ministry of Armed Forces on April 8. Following 66 tests, the ministry confirmed on April 10 that 50 of the crew members had tested positive for the virus, with 3 sailors being evacuated by helicopter to St. Anne Army Teaching Hospital for treatment. By April 19, the New York Times reported that a staggering 1,081 crew members from the carrier's naval group contracted the virus, counting for nearly 60% of the total crew aboard Charles de Gaulle. On May 11, 2020, Florence Parly, French Minister of Armed Forces, presented findings from 2 investigations to the National Assembly. The investigations revealed that the virus had likely been introduced before a stopover in Brest. Although the command and medical teams aboard the carrier were confident in their ability to manage the situation, the report did not find them at fault. Parly explained that the virus likely spread aboard Charles de Gaulle sometime between its departure from Limassol, Cyprus, on February 26, 2020, and its arrival in Brest on March 13, 2020. During this period, crew members had come aboard from several locations, including Cyprus, Sicily, the Balearic Islands, Spain, and Portugal. The stopover in Brest worsened the spread. Social distancing measures were enforced after this stop, but they negatively affected crew morale. As a result, after 2 weeks of strict measures, they were relaxed, and a concert was held on board on March 30th. By May 2020, most of the crew had recovered from the virus, except for 1 sailor who remained hospitalized after leaving the ICU. Later analysis from the Military Instruction Hospital Sainte-Anne in Toulon found that 60% of the ship's 1,706 crew members had developed antibodies by the end of their quarantine period. Clemenceau on February 21, 2021, Charles de Gaulle led the Carrier Strike Group (CSG) as part of the Clemenceau 21 mission. The CSG embarked on a multi-month deployment, first heading to the Mediterranean Sea before moving on to the Indian Ocean and Persian Gulf. The mission was scheduled to conclude with the group's return to Toulon in June 2021. Later that year, from November 18 to December 2, 2021, Charles de Gaulle participated in Exercise Polaris 21 in the Western Mediterranean, a major naval exercise aimed at strengthening operational readiness and cooperation among Allied forces. Clemenceau 22. On February 1, 2022, Charles de Gaulle set sail, leading the French Carrier Strike Group, CSG, as part of the Clemenceau 22 mission. The deployment, lasting from February to April 2022, took the CSG through the Mediterranean. The group was composed of several key vessels, including the air defense destroyer Forbin, the air defense frigate Alsace, the anti-submarine frigate Normandie, a Rubis-class submarine, and the replenishment oiler Marne. The CSG was also joined by 3 Allied ships and an additional submarine, enhancing the strength and coordination of the mission. Carrier Air Group. The Carrier Air Group, known as Le Groupe Aérien Embarqué, is made up of 3 squadrons, 11F, 12F, 70F, of 15 Rafale M aircraft each, and 1 squadron, 4F, 3 E-2C Hawkeye aircraft. Typically, Charles de Gaulle rotates 2 Rafale squadrons at a time, with a pair of E-2Cs to support them. During peacetime, the number of aircraft on board is usually reduced to about 30 Rafales, 2 E-2C Hawkeyes, and 2 AS-365 Dolphin helicopters, though the ship can accommodate up to 40 aircraft. Some Rafales stay in France for upgrades or training purposes. Additionally, U.S. Navy F-18 Hornets and C-2 Greyhounds often perform arrested landings and catapult launches from the Charles de Gaulle. Notably, in June 2011, 2 U.S. Navy C-2A Greyhounds were assigned to the French Navy for carrier onboard delivery (COD) missions during NATO operations in Libya. In 2019, during military exercises, Charles de Gaulle reached its record with 35 aircraft on board, including 2 Dauphin helicopters, 30 Rafales, 2 E-2C Hawkeyes, and 1 NH-90 Cayman helicopter. In times of war, the carrier is expected to operate at its full capacity of 40 aircraft. The air group has been involved in combat operations in Afghanistan, Syria, and Libya. French aircraft carrier procurement. The French Navy had long aimed to maintain a 2-carrier fleet, ensuring that at least one carrier would always be operational, even when the other was undergoing repairs. This plan required the construction of a second aircraft carrier. But currently, Charles de Gaulle remains the only one in service. Cost efficiency and equipment standardization have become essential factors in carrier development. At one point, France considered collaborating with Britain on future carriers. Thales UK, in partnership with BMT, had designed the Queen Elizabeth-class carriers for the UK. And this design was adapted for a potential French carrier known as PA-2. While the Royal Navy's requirements called for conventional propulsion, France preferred nuclear power. A study was conducted to evaluate the cost differences between nuclear propulsion and gas turbine. However, in 2013, the French Defense White Paper officially canceled plans for a second carrier due to budget constraints. After Charles de Gaulle underwent a midlife upgrade, the French Armed Forces Minister announced in October 2018 that an 18-month study would be conducted to outline the requirements for a new carrier. In December 2020, President Emmanuel Macron revealed plans for a new generation aircraft carrier, with construction expected to begin around 2025 and sea trials anticipated by 2036. This future carrier is planned to have a displacement of approximately 75,000 tons and carry around 32 next-generation fighters, 2 to 3 E-2D advanced Hawkeyes, and a number of unmanned carrier air vehicles yet to be determined. In the ever-evolving landscape of global naval power, Charles de Gaulle stands as a testament to France's military strength and technological innovation. From its deployment in major operations like Enduring Freedom and missions against the Islamic State, to its pivotal role in international exercises and humanitarian efforts, carrier has proven itself time and again as a critical asset for France and its allies. Despite setbacks and challenges, including technical issues, maintenance overhauls, and even a global pandemic, Charles de Gaulle has remained resilient, continuing to adapt and upgrade to meet modern demand. As France looks to the future with plans for a new generation aircraft carrier, the legacy of Charles de Gaulle will undoubtedly influence the next chapter in naval warfare. With new technologies on the horizon and global security dynamics shifting, France's naval capabilities will continue to play a central role on the world stage. Whether in times of war or peace, Charles de Gaulle represents more than just a ship. It symbolizes France's commitment to maintaining a strong and responsive military force in an increasingly complex world. Thank you for exploring the remarkable journey of Charles de Gaulle, a carrier that has made history and continues to shape the future of naval operations.